a voracious good option. It is still March 27th. And so we are jumping back into a document that we had started going through a little while ago. It is this side-by-side comparison of S100 and H146, both bills about CAFO permit, the authority for CAFOs going to A&R. So we're joined by our list of council. Welcome.
Morning.
Good morning.
Do you want me to be working off the side by side?
Yes. Okay, we're on the front of the second page. Unless someone has a different marker. That's the last.
You mean the third page?
Indeed. Just
checking.
Yeah, arguably the third page.
Okay, so that would be the page that has review and enforcement actions in the left hand row.
Yes. I had at least gotten through the staffing needs. Or I don't recall if we've gotten much past that.
Okay. The next row after staffing needs was the EPA directive that A&R must include a reasonable but expeditious timeline, including a date certain for completion of the corrective action plan. Neither bill has that, but last week A&R sent a response to EPA's request for additional detail in the corrective action plan. And it has a timeline in it. It has a timeline that extends from 2025 to 2028.
Quite detailed. Sorry.
It has specific detail about what they are going to do each year, usually around similar categories such as inspections and complaints, nutrient management plan review, staffing, permitting, etc. So
Do we have that on our website?
Yes, I put it up earlier. I mean, earlier in the week.
You did, okay, but I'll put it back up for today. Great, thank you.
So should I move on?
Unless there's questions about that. I guess just as a comment is, it seems like having submitted that in the most recent version, I wonder if that satisfies that. It's interesting that neither bill has that explicitly written down.
So, I mean, you obviously, when you enact legislation, can include implementation sections with deadlines and dates if you wanted that to be the case. Moving down in the chart, there's that definition of waters. It's highlighted here because in S100, there's the state definition of waters, but there's also the definition of waters of the United States, which is based off of federal law. And the concept there is, if you're going to go out and try to determine permitting for CAFO and whether or not there's a discharge, you limit it to those discharges to waters of the United States instead of the broader definition of waters, which is in state law. I was in Senate Ag when A&R said that they are revisiting that question and they may want to just have the broader definition of waters. I have not heard what their final decision on that is. I do think there is something to be said about having one definition and for one regulatory agency so that there isn't misunderstanding about situations where it may occur. But the definition of waters that's in H146 is basically the default definition that's in NBSH has in place.
We have
I
a
think that answers the question.
Oh, okay.
So, but if we wanted it to be one definition, the one that would include more water. Would be state
That would be the state definition. I mean, you look at it here, waters include all rivers, streams, creeks, brooks, reservoirs, ponds, lakes, streams, and all bodies of surface water, artificial or natural, that are contained within, flow through or border upon the state or any portion of it. That's pretty much it.
Yes, I know.
And that's the definition that is under the RAPs, is the definition of the broader water when there's a related. Anything related to water.
And the definition, the RAPs don't allow for discharges. So.
Right, but
This is the triggering
yes,
body of water.
yeah. So I do think for clarity, it makes sense to use the same definition of water, so everybody knows what water is. It's everything, all water.
I agree.
I don't know what waters of the United States means or will mean or could mean. Because it has been revised multiple times over the past several years. And the new administration has just announced that they're going to revise it again. So generally, it means interstate waters, navigable waters, tributaries of navigable waters, and wetlands with surface water connection to navigable waters and tributaries of navigable waters. But there are other components of that definition, which are more geographic specific. But that's effect, it's not as broad as the state definition.
And just so everyone knows, the plan is up on the website. For today.
Should I move on?
Yes, that'd be great.
On to the next page, there's the definition of animal feeding operation. Remember, to be a CAFO, you have to first be an AFO. These definitions are pretty consistent, they're just maybe structured differently. Has to be a lot or a facility where livestock are kept for 45 days or more in any 12-month period. And there's crop vegetation or forage growth are not sustained in the normal growing season over any portion of the lot. And then to avoid circumvention, there's a provision that says 2 or more farms qualifying as an APRO that are under common ownership shall be treated as one for purposes of that is consistent between both bills.
I was gonna say, these look identical except for the one. Okay.
Where you do see a difference is the definition of large concentrated animal feeding operation. There's in S100, there are several criteria in order to be determined to be a large CAFO. First, you have to have the number of animals that are required for mature dairy cows at 700 or more. But then on the next page, you will see that there are other conditions must be met, or one of the following conditions must be met. There must waste or discharge into waters of the United States via point source. Waste or discharge directly into waters that originate outside of or pass over, across, or through the facility or otherwise come in direct contact with the animals confined in the operation, or there's a precipitation related discharge under the control of the alpha that has occurred that was not in accordance with site facility nutrient practices that ensure appropriate agricultural utilization of the nutrients and whether the process is water. So you don't see that that second component or of the definition of large CAFO, because and Senator Hardy was talking to me at the break. That's really a determination if there is a discharge. And you could structure that differently. In S100, you could put it under a definition of discharge. You could say that that's when the permit will be required. It's. I see kind of the benefits of either model. What might be confusing is that this actually doesn't say it's a discharge, it says that it's any one of the following conditions are met. And I could see it either way. That's a bit of a. That's a kind of the attorney kind of question, like, let's figure out what the best way to do this is. And I can see either way. There is a default definition of discharge in statute that applies to all current permitting requirements for discharge, and it would apply in S100. And it is a broad definition, it's basically depositing or emission of any waste directly or indirectly into an injection well or into the waters of the state. Now, the S100, the agency has requested a change to that to include waste or pollutants that are placed, deposited, or emitted into the waters of the state. And that's for consistency with the Clean Water Act, as the Federal Clean Water Act prohibits discharges of pollutants. Now, arguably, it's waste as it's defined in Vermont broader than pollutants. You tell me. It's effluent sewage or any substance or material, liquid, gases, solid, or radioactive, including heated liquids, whether are not harmful or deleterious to waters, provided, however, the term sewage as used in this chapter shall not include the rinse or processed water from cheese manufacturing. It's definitely a Vermont definition.
We just identify cheese specifically?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It's Vermont.
It's Vermont. All right, fair enough. Sorry, that was the definition of
Waste.
waste. Okay, that's helpful, because when I heard waste in that definition of discharge, I'm like, well, does effluent count? Clearly it does.
Yep.
Okay, but adding the word pollutant to it.
Well, that is for purposes of consistency with the Clean Water Act.
And that was done in 124, right?
That's in one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is not on this chart.
Yeah,
One
so,
Oh, it was done, yeah, it was done.
124, yeah.
yeah, wondering about like, how do you identify a discharge? Like, if that is spelled out in either bill?
There is, one of the bills says that prima facie evidence of a discharge is the observed discharge, evidence of the discharge, such as standing water in a conveyance or ditch, etc. Or stained vegetation by effluent.
So what if there was evidence that a discharge had occurred, but the standing water is no longer there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, if the agency can determine that a discharge occurred from whatever evidence, they can require that farm, that operation to get a permit.
Even if the discharge is not happening at that moment.
Well, I think that is gonna be a fact-specific determination by the agency. If it's from the production facility and there's evidence of a continuing discharge from a production facility, I would expect that the agency would want that to be permanent. If it's from failure to comply with your nutrient management plan because an axle broke, or maybe that they're not going to require the permit in that instance. So to say it's going to be required every time that there's an evidence of a discharge, I can't say.
Interesting,
But it
yes,
does say, or maybe not in here, but you mentioned it, that if there's evidence like a stain, so that would imply that
it's not there.
that it's not there,
Yeah.
but there's clearly, you know, the stain.
Mhm.
That would be prima facie evidence, and that I think is in both 100 and 124. That language about it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that's the part that I wanna make sure it's clear, and I might wanna like beef that up like a little bit to say. Like, you know, evidence of a stain, what and what else, you know what I mean, to think about, there's evidence, but it's not there, correct, does that make sense? And so.
yeah, I just wanna look at the language to see, it might already be there, because it's not, you didn't put it in this chart, but I think it's.
I mean, unless that definition is coming from the Clean Water Act.
I think the language that includes the word pollutants is to include from Clean Water Act. Do you know where in the bill prima facie evidence language is?
It's in. Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, starting at the bottom of page 19, there's definitions of continuous
Right,
discharge, daily discharge, pollutant. And then agriculture.
Oh, it's page
waste,
29.
Page 29.
Yeah. Such as a stage, drainage swale, and standing water in a ditch close to waters. I could see that. Like such as, you know, sort of like a non-exhaustive list, so I wonder if.
Well, it's an including clause, so it means including, but not limited to.
Yeah, so that's just an example, could be other things. Okay, yes,
Just trying to get my head around this. When it says in this block here, the large concentrated field between operation. In order to be deemed, if I'm reading this right, a large concentrated animal feeding operation. You have to have had a discharge.
Or
And
it
yet,
could be required to have a permit,
Well-
yes.
okay, but the definition, but here it says. Effectively, if I'm reading it right, that in order to be a large concentrated feeding operation, you have to have had a discharge, which doesn't make sense. Right, because you're still a large feeding operation, whether you've had a discharge or not.
Well, that's I think one of the distinctions between the two bills and. In that, for an MFO and an LFO, H 146 is just going to require that to have a capable permit. For S 100, there's going to be a determination whether there is a discharge at that AFO. And then there will, depending on size, be required a large capo or medium capo for that AFO. Now, both contemplate in part that the small farm, there will be a determination about whether the small farm and small AFO needs the capo permit depending on additional factors. But for 146, if you're medium or large, you get a capo, you don't need to have a determination. And that is, I won't say it's expansive, it's more than what the Federal Clean Water Act requires. The Clean Water Act requires a capo permit when there is a discharge. And that is why the EPA request for action requires ANR to go out and do an inspection of farms to determine if there are discharges. And you will see in their plan that they submitted last week, they start up, I wouldn't say slow, but with a small number of both large and medium. And then over the course of the next 3 years, we'll complete inspections of those farms. I can't remember exactly how many large farms, and I don't know why. This is 35, Steve?
36, I think.
36, sorry. And there's approximately 200 medium farms.
It's 98, sorry, Steve Collier.
And then the rest, that's the whatever the number is, 500 or 400, whatever the number is.
439.
Approximately.
It's pretty impressive that you're even in the ballpark.
I started there, 1,200.
Oh, yeah.
And so the number that's fine. And so they'll go out and they'll inspect those medium and large, and then they'll. I expect small farms might be more of a complaint driven process, but they'll have inspection of them as well. And on complaints, the Clean Water Act requires a response to every complaint of a discharge.
And yes, but just to be clear, I think this is correct, but please let me know that under the required agricultural practices and the current regulatory structure. Discharges are not allowed already, right? They're already not
That's correct.
allowed. So there would only be a discharge if there was if they weren't following the required agricultural practices, or if there's some kind of error.
That's an interesting question, you know, it's more kind of it's philosophical question, if there's 100-year rain event and there's
Right.
a discharge, is that a discharge in Vermont? Yeah, that's a discharge in Vermont, but it wouldn't be a discharge under the federal CAFO rules. So
Our discharge, the current regulatory structure for discharges is actually stricter.
well, I mean, it doesn't have that 100-year
Uh-huh.
event exception. Whether or not it would be enforced is, I think the question that EPA was getting at is like, theoretically, the authority is there already for A&R to enforce. And it's been there, for 15 years, maybe more. And there hasn't been a discharge from a EPO. And I think that is the consternation that EPA is in, that there must have been, and there must have been one that should have been permitted. I mean, why hasn't there been?
Mhm. Just looking at the numbers, I think there's so many farms, there's so much water, there's so much food, somebody must have discharged.
I want to come back to Senator Bondurant's question, because I think I need to wrap my head around. I think it's the same question. In this definition of a large CAFO, why is this section B here? Is that because we're not defining this? Yeah, I think I just need to that again.
I think it's partly they looked at the CAFO rules, the federal CAFO rules, and they kind of Frankenstein them a little bit. Because some of that language in B is really very similar, not exactly the same as what's in the CAFO rules. I think you could put that language. I think you could put it here. I think you could put it under a discharge, a definition of discharge. I think you could put it underneath the permit standard. It's like an LFO needs a permit if the following discharges occur, discharge to X is just. No, I think there's different ways to structure it. It is the threshold that triggers the permit.